Yet it pleased the Lord to see him crushed by disease, to see if his soul will offer restitution, that he might see his seed and prolong his days.
Will see his seed, he will prolong his days.
He shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days.
That he might see his zerah, his seed, and prolong his days. Not his disciples, but his zerah, his own seed. Now we know that Jesus in the story did not have any children.
2 strikes and he's out. What does it mean when it says he will see his seed? That means children. In the Bible, seed, zerah, means offspring. Seed appears over 200 times in the Bible, and it always means just physical children.
And when we talk about seed, Christians will often say that Jesus did fulfill this because he had many disciples. So they clearly take this as not literal, but figurative children, i.e. pupils, disciples can be considered children. However, if you look in the Hebrew in this verse, it uses the word zerah, a very stark expression, where zerah is a word for seed. It is also the biblical word for sperm, and it always refers to physical offspring.
This is a common objection from Jewish counter-missionaries, and you may also hear it from Muslims who infamously parrot anyone who hates Jesus in order to propagate Islam.
But the part where it says he shall see his seed, the Hebrew word is zerah, which always means physical seed in the Old Testament.
The overall argument here that they're making is that if Isaiah 53 is about Jesus, then how do we rightly understand and interpret verse 10, which says, according to the Jewish Publication Society translation, quote, "But the Lord chose to crush him by disease, that if he made himself an offering for guilt, he might see offspring and have long life, and that through him the Lord's purpose might prosper," unquote. And the key phrase we want to focus on is, he might see offspring. What we want to examine is the specific Hebrew phrase, yara zara, which this Jewish translation renders as, he might see offspring. The King James Version renders the phrase as, he shall see his seed. And the Young's literal translation renders it as, he seeth seed. The counter-missionaries contend that the word zara can only refer to physical seed and offspring, and that this word cannot be used metaphorically, so that if we say Jesus is the Messiah, the servant of the Lord of Isaiah 53, then he must have physical descendants, or they claim it cannot be about him. There are a number of things we must examine about this objection. 1. Does the verse say that he will see his physical seed/descendants? 2. Does the word zara only mean physical seed or descendants? 3. Do all Jews agree that this is how Isaiah 53 verse 10 is interpreted? 4. How do we rightly understand and interpret Isaiah 53 verse 10? To answer the first question, does the verse say that he will see his physical seed/descendants? The Hebrew phrase yara zara just means he will see seed. The pronoun his is not actually in there. He will see his seed. So the Hebrew just says he will see seed. If that's the case, that it only refers to physical seed, then this is no problem. It could refer to physical Israelites, that is, kinsmen according to the flesh who believe in Jesus. Second, does the word zara only refer to physical seed or descendants? Let's examine how this word is used elsewhere in Isaiah and then in other parts of the Hebrew Bible. But before we do that, let's take a look at verse 2 in Isaiah 53 in the New King James Version, which reads, quote, "For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him." We already see that there's a hint of metaphorical language being employed here, figurative language. The servant will grow up as a tender plant. A tender plant, a root, out of dry ground, a root out of dry ground. So you can see how the language of seed that comes up later in verse 10 is fitting. But let's continue with the question, does the word zara only ever refer to physical seed or descendants? I'll be quoting the Jewish Publication Society Bible for the biblical references unless I specify otherwise. In Isaiah chapter 1 verse 4 it reads, "Ah, sinful nation, people laden with iniquity, brood of evildoers, depraved children, they have forsaken the Lord, spurned the Holy One of Israel, turned their backs on him." We see here in Isaiah chapter 1 verse 4 that the word zera is used to refer to the seed of evil people, which here means that they act at the very core of their being as evil people. Not necessarily that their fathers had an evil seed in a physical, literal sense. Isaiah chapter 14 verse 20 uses the same phrase with the same meaning. "You shall not have a burial like them, because you destroyed your country, murdered your people. Let the breed of evildoers never more be named." And in Isaiah chapter 57, verses 3 to 4, "But as for you, come closer, you sons of a sorceress, you offspring of an adulterer and a harlot. With whom do you act so familiarly? At whom do you open your mouth and stick out your tongue? Why are you, children of iniquity, offspring of treachery?" In these passages, the word zara is used twice. The zara of an adulterer and harlot, and the zara of treachery or falsehood. As you can see, the prophet Isaiah used the word zara in a figurative or metaphorical sense. In these cases, it referred to people who were so morally depraved that at the very core of their being, it's as if their very own seed was one that continued to fight and sin against the Lord in their lies, adulteries, and evil doings. Clearly being used metaphorically and figuratively. And if we look at how the word zara is used elsewhere in the Bible, we see that in Psalm 22, verse 30, "Offspring shall serve him. The Lord's fame shall be proclaimed to the generation." Or as the New King James Version renders it, "A posterity shall serve him, and it shall be recounted of the Lord to the next generation." This is an example of where the word zara is being paralleled with the Hebrew word dor, which means generation. The word zara here, as being used by the psalmist, is being used to mean generation, not physical seed or physical offspring, as the counter-missionaries claim it can only mean.
And it always means just physical children.
And it always refers to physical offspring.
In Genesis 3:15, God says to the serpent, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. They shall strike at your head, and you shall strike at their heel." Or as rendered in the New King James Version, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Now we know that the serpent here is actually the devil, as we see in Revelation chapter 12, verse 9, which says, "So the great dragon was cast out, the serpent of old, called the devil and Satan." The serpent of old, called the devil and Satan. The devil does not have physical descendants or physical seed. So here's an example where the word zara can be used to denote followers or spiritual descendants, but certainly not physical ones, in the case of the serpent in Genesis 3:15. And the final example will be from Malachi chapter 2, verse 15. "Did not the one make all, so that all remaining life breath is his? And what does that one seek but godly folk? So be careful of all your life breath, and let no one break faith with the wife of his youth." The Hebrew here says Zara Elohim, the Zara of God. Does this mean that God has physical descendants because
And it always refers to physical offspring.
And it always means just physical children.
Are they seriously going to suggest that God has physical offspring, physical descendants? The Jewish Publication Society Bible renders Zara Elohim as godly folk. In this example, as even recognized by these Jewish translators, it doesn't refer to God having physical descendants, but to say Zara, or seed of Elohim, God, means that they are godly people. Similar to the previous examples, when the word Zara is paired with other words like falsehood or evildoers, it can be used to mean that the people are a lying people or an evil people. So the word Zara can also be used in a positive way when it's paired with Elohim or with God to refer to a godly people, as here in our example, Malachi chapter 2, verse 15. I think this strongly demonstrates the fact that the rabbis are clearly not telling you the truth. The truth is that the word Zara can and is used metaphorically and figuratively throughout Isaiah and throughout the Hebrew Bible. Which leads us on to our next question. Do all Jews agree that this is how Isaiah 53 verse 10 is interpreted? The simple answer is no, it's not. There's a modern movement in ultra-Orthodox Judaism called Chabad Lubavitch, where many inside the movement believe that their late leader, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, their Rebbe, is the Messiah. His followers applied Isaiah 53 to him and claimed he fulfilled it, yet him and his wife were unable to have children. So how do they miss the memo that verse 10 demands that the Messiah or the servant must have physical descendants? Furthermore, Saadia Gaon, a prominent rabbi and leader in the 9th-10th centuries, applied Isaiah 53 to Jeremiah. Yet Jeremiah was commanded by God to never marry or have children. How did the Lubavitchers, how did Saadia Gaon read Isaiah 53:10 and yet still apply it to people who never had physical descendants? It's because they rightly understood that it's figurative. And which other Jew understands it figuratively? Well, all of the rabbis who say, all of the Jews who say that the servant of the Lord is Israel. If the servant of the Lord is Israel, the nation of Israel, and according to these counter-missionaries, the servant must have physical offspring, then how can Israel, a nation, produce physical offspring? Is Israel going to get together with Syria and sire a child, or maybe Egypt? How can a nation produce a physical offspring? The rabbis would have to interpret this metaphorically, or at the very least say that some individuals within the nation would produce offspring, but others would not. However you slice it, the modern dominant rabbinic interpretation that the servant of the Lord is Israel must interpret verse 10 metaphorically, unless a rabbi wants to explain to us how a nation can produce a physical offspring. So even the rabbis themselves who are making this objection, if they were consistent, would have to say that in their own interpretation is metaphoric, it is figurative, because Israel as a nation cannot produce physical seed or physical descendants. On to our last question, which is, how do we rightly understand and interpret Isaiah chapter 53 verse 10? If we take what the counter-missionary rabbis say seriously and ignore the figurative usages of the word Zara elsewhere in Isaiah and throughout the Hebrew Bible, then we can interpret the phrase Yara Zara, he shall see seed, in a physical sense, in that physical fellow Israelites of Jesus, who himself was an Israelite, and they believed in him, and his mission was prolonged and lives on through them, who are his physical nation, his kinsmen according to the flesh. If we take into account that the word Zara can and does have a figurative and metaphorical usage in the Hebrew Bible, and doesn't necessarily mean physical descendants or offspring, then we can see how all followers of Jesus are the fulfillment of this. In John chapter 1 verse 4, it says, "In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind." John chapter 8, verse 12, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And in John chapter 12, verse 36, Jesus says, believe in the light while you have the light, so that you may become children of light. We see clearly that Jesus is the light. And Jesus said that in order to become children of the light, we must believe in him. In order to become the zara, the seed, the children of the light, we must believe in him. So whether you want to take zara physically or figuratively, neither of these interpretations demand that Jesus had to have physical offspring or physical children in order to be the Messiah, the servant of the Lord, according to Isaiah 53. Thanks for watching. God bless you all. Jesus is Lord, and I invite you to become a child of the light if you're not already. Believe in him and become his zara.